Hey everyone, Tankenstein here. In this video, I'll be reviewing the T29, a currently Tier 4 7.0 BR heavy tank that exists as a premium pack vehicle for the American Ground Forces tech tree. In this video, I'll be going over everything that you need to know about it, including its stats, how it plays, its strengths and weaknesses. I'll give it some scores in several key areas, and then I'll give my final recommendation on if I feel that this vehicle is worth purchasing or not. As always, please consider subscribing if you like more content like this, especially if you like guides, reviews, walruses, history videos, tickle me Elmos, and more. But without further ado, let's get into the video. To start, I'll place its stats here on the side of the screen. Important stats to know are its armor, its movement speed, and its reload speed. Now with that said, let's get into how it plays. In short, this is a front-lining tank. Due to its so-so mobility, even for a heavy tank, the T29 can move with the front lines, and because of its heavy armor on the front of the turret, it can also sustain plenty of hits from the enemy without taking serious damage. Combined with its powerful 105mm cannon, the T29 can be devastating when used correctly. This is, however, in a perfect world, and more often than not, enemies will shoot through the hull of the T29, as it is essentially a larger M26 Pershing hull with all the same armor, strengths, and weaknesses. Because of this, it is of paramount importance to hide the hull whenever possible. Additionally, the reload on the cannon, while not absolutely terrible, is still between 12.5 and 16.25 seconds depending on crew skill, which takes brawling out of the equation unless of course you need to do it. This longer reload and high armor pen that sits upwards of 250mm with its APC-BC ammunition would indicate that this is a good sniper, but the muzzle velocities of all the T29 shells, sans the APCR shell, are mediocre, being around 900 meters per second. While these are not outright poor, this compares unfavorably to true snipers such as the Tiger II SLA-16, which has a comparable amount of armor pen, nearly 2 times faster reload, and a 1000 meter per second muzzle velocity with its own APC-BC ammunition. Because of these traits, the T29 almost has an identity crisis. It seems like it should snipe well, but it's only average at that job, though it at least has fairly good optics. It also seems like it should be excellent at frontlining, and it definitely can be, but again, the T29 has the hull of a 6.3 BR medium tank, which itself is an evolution of even lower BR medium tanks, such as the T25 and T20. Regardless, so long as you can properly protect your hull and pop in and out of cover between reloads, the T29 can be incredibly effective, as it can one-shot nearly every enemy that it will face outside of higher BR Soviet tanks, and of course, the mouse. Now with that said, let's get into its strengths and weaknesses, and first, for its strengths. The T29 has a very powerful cannon that can shoot through over 250mm of armor, with a shell that also has 150 grams of explosive filler equivalent. Second, the T29 has 350 cal HMGs, with 2 of them mounted coaxially in the turret itself, which means that they will be able to be used with only 2 crew members. This many HMGs essentially turns the T29 to a makeshift AA vehicle that can also annihilate lightly armored vehicles without using its cannon, as well as destroying tank tracks. Third, it features 6 crew members, which is great for survivability, as well as a large crew compartment. Fourth, it has very good gunner's optics of between 4 and 8 times zoom. For its fifth strength, the T29 has great turret armor overall, with the front of the turret having upwards of 200mm of armor at its thickest. Beyond this, it has good gun depression of -10 degrees, which makes hold down positions much easier with this vehicle. And finally, it has premium RP and SL bonuses. And now for its weaknesses, it has a poor top speed mixed with a poor power to weight ratio of just about 12 horsepower per ton, which means poor acceleration and of course mediocre mobility. For its second weakness, it has a mediocre reload rate of again 12.5 to 16.25 seconds depending on crew skill. Third, it has a mediocre muzzle velocity of just 899 meters per second with its T13 APC-BC shell, which will be the most used shell with this vehicle. Fourth, it has hull armor that isn't great, especially on the lower glacis and the sides. Additionally, when facing advanced ammunition types such as Heat FS, APDS, occasionally APFSDS, and ATGMs, the frontal turret armor, of which is over 200mm, will be penned with ease. Additionally, Tiger IIs, which is one of the most common vehicles that you will face, can easily destroy the frontal turret armor with a shot from relatively close range, so around 500 meters or less. Beyond this is a very large tank with an exceptionally large turret that has an excessive amount of ammunition contained within. These factors make the T29 a prime candidate for an ammo cook-off should it be penetrated. And finally, it has a huge cannon that is easily destroyed by enemy fire. Now with that said, let's get into how I score this vehicle in several key areas. First, for its armament. I give the T29 a 7.5 out of 10. The armament on this vehicle, being the 105mm T5E2 cannon, is very good, and despite a somewhat long reload of between 12.5 and 16.25 seconds, it can destroy almost every enemy that it hits with ease. It has a very good 253mm of armor pen with its T13 APCBC shell that has again around 177 grams of explosive filler equivalent. Both the armor pen and explosive filler means that the T29 will be able to one-shot almost every tank within its BR bracket, although higher BR Soviet tanks become a bit difficult to kill due to their thick sloped armor. Additionally, the T29 E3 APCR ammunition can shoot through nearly 300mm of armor, which is a nice boost in emergency situations, though again, this is not enough to stop a lot of tanks. On top of all this, the T29 boasts 3 HMGs, with 2 in the turret, meaning that it can act as an impromptu SPAA that can destroy lightly armored vehicles with ease without needing to fire your main cannon, placing you in a potentially dangerous position with its mediocre reload speed. On the negative side, however, the APCBC shell has a mediocre muzzle velocity of 899 meters per second, which means that it will have a relatively large amount of shell drop, at least compared to better snipers like the Tiger II, which may make longer range shots more tricky. Now for its mobility, I give it a 5 out of 10, and that might be a little bit generous. This isn't the most maneuverable vehicle in game, but despite being a heavy tank with over 64 tons of heft, it can still feel fairly spry, at least when moving on a flat road and with concrete beneath your tracks. This is largely due to its 770 horsepower engine and large tracks. Though I am certainly basing its maneuverability versus every other tank in War Thunder, I am weighing this score a little bit heavier based on how I feel that it compares with other heavy tanks. As such, while the T29 is by no means fast or maneuverable compared to a medium or light tank, it is still give or take around average versus other heavy tanks around this BR, and thus feels perfectly decent for what it is, if not occasionally fairly good. Now for survivability, I give this a 6.25 out of 10. The armor on the front of the T29's turret is surprisingly thick, with it being 203mm at its thickest, with about 158mm and 102mm being on the sides and the rear of the turret respectively. This makes turret kills much less likely, although of course you will be facing high penning shell types like APDS and Heat FS with some regularity, so this armor thickness may not matter as much as you might want. Unfortunately, however, the T29's chassis is an elongated version of what's found on the M26 Pershing, which gives you medium tank armor all around the vehicle, with only 102mm of armor on the upper glacis and only 70mm on the lower glacis. The entire chassis of this vehicle is essentially a gigantic weak spot, with the lower glacis being a favorite for people to shoot. On the plus side, however, the T29 features 6 crew members and a relatively spacious interior, both of which contribute majorly to the survival of this vehicle, although the ammo is scattered around almost haphazardly, which also hurts survivability. Depending on your perspective and preferences, I could say the T29 can easily be a 7 out of 10 for survivability, or if some people dislike how this thing has its armor laid out, even a 5 out of 10. But again, for me, I give it a 6.25 out of 10, and that's relative to heavy tanks. Now with that said, overall, I give the T29 a 6 out of 10. This is a weird beast that has a huge range of opinions on it. For example, while one's view of survivability of this vehicle is highly subjective, one could also say the same about its armament and to an extent its mobility. In my opinion, however, as I own or have used in matches likely hundreds of tanks beyond 6.0 BR, the T29 still compares somewhat favorably to its competition. It isn't absolutely amazing, thus the fairly good though not great 6 out of 10 score, but it is still an effective heavy tank when used properly. It can destroy almost any tank that it fights, and while it has mediocre armor thickness and reload time, it can still fight with urgency and hold up against enemy fire fairly well. With all that said, do I recommend the T29? Well, in all, while the T29 is a perfectly good grinder and is a great vehicle to have, I would still place the Tiger II SLA-16, IS-6, and especially the Samuwa SM above it in terms of overall capability. All three vehicles are a bit better than the T29, at least relative to BR. The Sumiwa SM has better firepower and mobility, while the IS-6 has better armor due to its shaping, and the Tiger II SLA-16 is a lower BR with a great cannon and arguably better armor, despite having a slightly lower power to weight ratio. Does this make the T29 bad? No, because it is still a very good tank, but the aforementioned tanks are just slightly better, at least in my opinion, with the most fun of the bunch being again the Sumiwa SM. Going back to the T29 though, I do still recommend it if you need a good grinder for the American Ground Forces tech tree, as it will be a great anchor to your lineup and is consistently able to destroy enemies with ease due to its powerful cannon, even though it doesn't have the best mobility in its class. Again, this is not a bad vehicle at all, and I do recommend it for purchase, though if I had to rank them, I would place the Sumiwa SM and Tiger II SLA-16 as number 1 and number 2 in this set of premium pack vehicles respectively, with the IS-6, T29, and M51 following respectively. Now number 1 through 4 in this ranking from the SM to the T29 don't have too much separating them in terms of effectiveness, and are thus extremely viable, with the M51 coming in a distant last place. So yes, I do recommend the T29 for purchase, and to a minor extent, I give it my Tankenstein seal of approval. I think it's a perfectly good vehicle, but I'm not wholeheartedly behind it if you have other premium tanks that you might want to purchase first. Now that said, that about ends this video. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm always interested to read your opinions. Either way, thanks again guys, and I'll see you all on the other side. Take care everyone.